Welcome back to Island Bike Life. Today, I'm going to run you through how to do a full service of the bearings on the current model lineup from Yeti Cycles. This is going to be the same across all of the bikes with a few minor differences for the SB100 and 115 because of their different Switch Infinity link setups. Fundamentally, this is going to be the same for all of the bikes in Yeti's lineup, and the same process can be modified to be used for any bike from any manufacturer. You're just going to need slightly different tools depending on the bearing sizes that you're dealing with. This might seem like a little bit of a scary or daunting task to be pressing and pulling bearings out of your carbon or aluminum frames depending on your bike, but it really isn't if you have the right tools and you take your time. Now, of course, all of this can be done without the tools that I'm showing you here, but from my experience and the cost that it takes a shop to do this, investing in some of these tools, especially considering most bearings are going to be the same from bike to bike, it really is a good long-term investment, and you're going to make sure your bike is able to be running a tip-top shape in the least amount of time from your home garage. First thing you want to make sure is that your bike is nice and clean. Once everything is apart, you're going to obviously do a touch-up clean in between some of the surfaces that you might not be able to clean when the bike is fully assembled. So make sure everything is nice and clean before you put it back together. As for the Yeti bikes themselves, I have a few other videos posted already that it's going to go through how to dismantle and put all of the linkages and Switch Infinity stuff back together. I'm not going to be going through that again here. It seems like a redundancy, and you can certainly check that video out if you have any questions about that process leading up to the removal and the installation of the bearings themselves. So let's take a look at the tools that I recommend to get this job done. The full bearing kit by Yeti is a bit expensive. You can source all of them on their own to save a little bit of money. The same goes for the bearing extractors and the presses. You can do this with basic hand tools, but the RRP kits are really cost effective, as are the wheels manufacturing extractors for the Switch Infinity and the shock extenders. The Allen keys used will be required to take everything apart, and you will need doubles of both the 5 and the 6mm keys. Don't forget, a torque wrench is going to be required when reassembling, so check out the other video for those details. The lock ring tool is for the seat stays and is a must-have. General purpose grease for the bearings is needed, but check the other video for the additional grease and thread locker requirements for the install when you're all done. With the tools ready, get your workspace set up and ready to go. It doesn't matter which part you do first, and while you can do the Switch Infinity on the bike, I like to take the opportunity to do a clean on the whole thing since it's mostly apart anyway. The extractor goes in one side of the link. You tighten it down with a wrench and a 6mm Allen key. You want to make sure that it's locked in there tight before hammering on it to avoid any damage or the extractor itself slipping out. If the link is removed, you're best to use a vise to secure it before you start to extract that bearing. Use a microfiber towel or get some rubber vise pads to avoid damaging or scratching the link. It's only going to take a few good hits on the extractor to get the bearing out. I like to use a towel as it acts as a way to catch the bearing and prevent it from falling onto the floor. After you get the first one out, make sure you take out the inner sleeve so that it doesn't get lost or missing on your floor. The extractor is simply loosened off to remove the old bearing, and then you repeat this process on the other side. The inside of the link is going to be very dirty, so take time to clean the inside of the sleeve off. Once it is clean, you might notice there's 4 set screws. They're on the side where the grease ports are. Word from Yeti is that you're not to touch or adjust these in any way. They're preloaded from Yeti, and they secure the whole link itself and the inner sleeves into the body, and removing them can cause a lot of damage and injury, so just leave those be. Once clean, you can start to prep the link for reassembly. Like you're going to do for all of these, you're going to apply a very thin layer of grease to both the bearings and the link surfaces. This is going to help make pressing of the bearings a lot easier and won't have them binding up or causing any damage. This is the only part where I recommend doing both bearings at once. It can be done one at a time, but it is more difficult with the RRP press that I use. The blue pieces of the kits are used for the pressing, and we'll use the red ones here in a bit when it's time to extract bearings from different parts of the bike. Setting the link up as I'm showing here will do both bearings, and don't forget to put the sleeve back in during this process or you'll be forced to take the whole thing apart again. The alignment is important for the bearings. There's a little flange that you have to make sure is on the top and not on the inside, and take your time to get things snugged up but not too tight. Take a look at how I've set this up and just repeat this, or if you're using this tool, just mirror what I'm doing and everything will go fine. You want to make sure the bearings are as straight as possible. The link itself is beveled on the inside, so if the bearings are off a very small amount, they will level themselves off. So it isn't critical that they are perfectly straight, but keep them as level as you can. Once you have everything set, use the press to get them in there. Chances are that one side will bottom out first, and then the second side will seat itself. You will know when you're done, as you'll feel the press bottom out and you can't possibly go anymore. Once the bearings are finished being pressed in, undo everything, remove all the pieces, and double check that everything is seated nice and level and that the bearings themselves are moving freely. Next, I normally deal with the shock linkage. This is split into a couple different pieces between the linkage and the extenders themselves. The main link has two bearings that need to be extracted. Using the red pieces from the kit, align the bearings to remove to the outside of the link. Again, lightly snug the extractor up, but make sure the outside cap is set onto the body of the link itself. If it is not aligned, the bearing will not be able to be extracted and could cause damage to the linkage. I found that this part of the link normally is not too dirty behind the bearings. The surfaces are pretty well protected, but make sure everything is clean before you get going. Repeat this process for the second bearing and prepare to press the new ones back in. As you did before, apply a thin layer of grease to both bearings and to the surfaces of the linkage. Using the RRP press and the blue pieces from the kit, install each bearing one at a time. Once pressed in, just make sure everything is level and moving freely before moving on. Next are the shock extenders. These are very small bearings and the RRP kit works most often. The removal will go in the same way using the red pieces from the kit. They don't actually supply a kit that I could find that was specific for this bearing size, and because of the linkage design, the bearing will extract either fully or in my case almost all the way. One of my extenders, the bearing came out no problem. The other one, it didn't come out exactly all the way, and so because of that I have an 8mm extractor to deal with that should it happen. This is the same style as would be used on the Switch Infinity link, and that'll help get it out the rest of the way if you need to. The pressing of the bearing, of course, is the same way with a light layer of grease on both the bearings and the extender surfaces. The RRP blue pieces work perfectly for the pressing, and I didn't have any issues with those like I did with the red extractor pieces. You want to set it up the same way as with all of the other bearings, with the bottom out plate installed first, then the bearing and the press piece to finish it all off. Out of all of the bearings on the bike, these shock extender ones seem to wear the least. They don't move very much and they're pretty weather resistant based on where they are on the bike itself. Since I had them purchased in the kit, I replaced them, but I didn't really require it. They were almost brand new. I will probably source these bearings independently versus buying the ones from Yeti as I do this again next year. And I will probably actually only replace the extender bearings every second service, as they really were pretty much perfect. The last two bearings are on the seat stays and will require the lock ring to be removed before you do anything. They are in there fairly tight and will require a wrench to remove. This particular bearing is one that I do not recommend doing without the right tool from Yeti. Their extractor is larger and has a rubber edge to prevent damage to the frame. If you were to use a normal extractor, say from the RRP kit or simple hand tools, you would likely damage the threads on the lock ring or damage the frame itself. This is one where I definitely recommend to spend the money on the tool if you're going to tackle this job at home yourself, Save yourself the trouble of damaging the frame, which is going to cost you a lot more than the $50 extractor from Yeti. It works in the same basic way and will require a wrench to secure the nut on the back while using an 8mm Allen key to extract the bearing itself. This area will likely be pretty dirty on the inside, so make sure it is cleaned out well and then begin the pressing prep for the new bearings. Using a light amount of grease on the frame and on the bearing, get the blue RRP kit ready to go. You can use the kit to press the bearing in no problem, as the pressing side is smaller than the lock ring threads and works really well. Repeat this process for the other side and you're all done. Overall, this job, not counting the teardown and installation of the linkages and shocks, shouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes. Especially after you've done it a couple of times, you'll be able to rip through the extraction and the pressing in no time at all. Once the bearings are all in and the frame is all cleaned up, you can start the installation of the linkages, the switch infinity, and the shock to get your bike rolling and back on the trails.
So there you have it. Not an overly complicated process. So long as you have some patience, take your time, have the parts and the tools, you can get this one done at home, no problem at all. If you found this useful, think about hitting the subscribe and the like button. There's other videos like this on the channel already, with more to come, as well as some upcoming videos with riding in and around BC over the coming months. Thanks again for watching, and let's go hit the trails.